Today's daf going to be learning is Bava Metzia daf tzadi vav. We're going to get started from tzadi Hama bet toward the bottom. Okay, what we're now going to try to figure out is why it is that when we have this issue of sheila bebalim, okay, which we discussed yesterday. Again, let me just review from the beginning of class the two reasons we talked about yesterday for why sheila bebalim is an exemption. Either, okay, again, there's more, but the Ralbag on the Torah gives two reasons. We're only going to go through one of them right now, which is it's kind of looked at as a lie. You can't both be an Eved and an Adon. You can't be in two positions of subjugating someone else and being subjugated yourself. And basically by saying, if you borrow something, you're chayv and ones, that's saying you're subjugated to the other person. But if they're already working for you and they're kind of under you, then you can't be under them. It just doesn't work. Okay, that's one way of looking at it. And as I mentioned, Rabbanit Shimoni's husband, Rav Shimoni, basically says that when I borrow something, okay, when I borrow an item of yours, when you're working for me, it's kind of, maybe I'll explain even better than yesterday. It's kind of as if I'm saying to you, come work for me and bring your tools with you. In other words, what he says is it's all part of one arrangement. It's not an arrangement of sheila. If I say work for me and bring your tools with you, that's like me saying that's part of the arrangement I'm making with you as my worker. It's not even sheila. Okay, and what Rav Shimoni points out is that the difference between him and what the Ralbag says is not just a difference in approach, but it's that according to the Ralbag, it's still sheila. It's just you can't be responsible. According to his explanation, it's not even sheila really. You're not borrowing. It's really just that you're telling the person come to work with your stuff. Okay. And then that's different. That's the concept. But now the question is why, in order to be considered sheila bebalim, that you're going to be exempt, it has to be from the moment, has to be that the work arrangement was already in existence at the time of the sheila and not at the time of, right? It doesn't help if you weren't working for me when I borrowed it, and you were working for me later before it broke, that won't exempt me. So now we're going to have three answers for it. Right now we're going to have Abaye, who also Rabbi Yoshia, in terms of the machlokah we saw Rabbi Yoshia, Rabbi Yonatan yesterday, with had a view when it says and, does it mean both have to be there? And we're going to have Rava, who holds like Rabbi Yonatan, and then Rav Ashi is going to bring a totally different way of understanding it. Okay. This next section of Abaye holding Rabbi Yoshia and Rava holding Rabbi Yonatan, it's a little bit confusing, okay, but bear with me. So, Abaye Tzara Laki Rabbi Yoshia, we're about 7 lines from the bottom of yesterday's daf, and Mutaretz L'Krai Ki Rabbi Yoshia, that's the bottom of Tzadi Hama Bet. He says, Rava Tzara Laki Rabbi Yonatan and Mutaretz L'Krai Ki Rabbi Yonatan. Okay, so Abaye holds like Rabbi Yoshia and explains the psukim like Rabbi Yoshia, and Rava holds like Rabbi Yonatan and explains like Rabbi Yonatan. Abaye Tzara Laki Rabbi Yoshia and Mutaretz L'Krai Ki Rabbi Yoshia. Okay, so that's just going back to what we just said. Okay, we just kind of put title, sentence up. One's going to do one, one's going to do the other. Let's see. So we go back to these psukim we talked about yesterday that it says, on the one hand, you will pay if the owner wasn't there, and you won't pay if the owner was there. So again, we're going to have this. Why is it repeating it? Ba'alav ein imo shalem yishalem. In the first pasuk, it says, if the owner's not there, you have to pay. But the important part is, it says in that pasuk, ki yish'al ishu imre'eu v'nish baromet. Now, and according to Rabbi Yoshia, means both have to be there, which means at the time of sheila and at the time it breaks, ba'alav ein imo, if at both stages the owner wasn't there, then you're going to have to pay. So now let's read what they darshan from this. Tama delete b'travayu. It sounds like the reason is because he wasn't there, not at the time of sheila and not at the time of it broke. Ha'ite b'chada v'leite b'chada patur. But it sounds like if there was any one, if he was there for one or there for the other, right? It's just because the owner wasn't there, not for this and not for that. But if the owner was there either for sheila or the owner was there, right, again, which just means the owner was already working or the owner was working later before it broke, well, you would be exempt. The problem is that contradicts the inference from the next verse, which is obvious because the next verse says, Haktiv im ba'alavi mola yishalem. And from there, what are we going to infer? If the owner was not there, now was not there when? Well, because it said end in the middle of the previous pasuk, it means not there for this and not there for that. Only if you weren't there both times are you going to be exempt. which contradicts the inference from the first, which is as long as you were there for one of them, right? So right? So Tama the ite b'travayu, it's because you were there. If you were there both at the time of sheila and at the time of breaking, then right, but if you weren't, you were there for one or not the other, you'd actually be obligated. So the inference from one pasuk contradicts the inference from the second pasuk, to which they say, how does Abaye resolve this? Lamar l'cha, haya imo b'shat sheila, ein tzarich liot ima b'shat shvura v'meita. Haya imo b'shat shvura v'meita, tzarich liot imo b'shat sheila. So now we're going to infer from this that in one situation where you're in one and not the other, you'll be chayv, and in one you'll be patur. So how does it work? If you were there b'shat sheila but not shat meita, right? That's the inference for one of them. Then you'll be obligated. I'm sorry, then you'll be exempt because you were there b'shat sheila, not b'shat shvura meita. And if it was the reverse, you weren't working yet b'shat sheila, but you were b'shat shvura meita, that doesn't matter. You're still chayav because that's not the exemption. So that's how he resolves the contradiction. Rava is going to start with the opposite premise, but again have two inferences that contradict in a similar way and resolve them in the same manner. It's just the contradiction is different because he's going to hold like Rabbi Yonatan. Now, Rabbi Yonatan, if you remember, holds if it says this and that, we're now at the top of Tzadi Vav. This and that means this or that. Okay, so he's going to read the psukim as, okay, let's read it. Rabbi Sabalak Rabbi Yonatan, Mutaritz L'Krai Rabbi Yonatan. So he reads like Rabbi Yonatan, comes up with a contradiction as well, and then resolves it with Rabbi Yonatan glasses on. Titania, as it says in a bright. Im ba'alav imo lo yishalem. Okay, some people get rid of the Titania, okay, because it's not a braita, it's just like the previous one. If ba'alav imo lo yishalem, so now he starts with the second pasuk. If the owners are there, you don't have to pay. Mashma di'ite b'travayu, mashma nami di'ite b'chad v'leite b'chad patur. It sounds like im ba'alav imo, either way, right? Either for the whole time, or just for shat sheila, or just for shat that it died, or it broke. Uchtiv, but the problem is that contradicts the inference from the other pasuk. Ba'alav enimo, the first pasuk says, if the owner is not there, shalem is shalem. And again, that refers back to if you borrowed it, or, right, and it died, but and doesn't mean and means either or. So, mashma delete b'travayu, it sounds like the balim weren't there the whole time, or could have been mashma nami d'chi'iti b'chad v'leite b'chad, or they were there for one part or the other part. Doesn't matter, and either which way you'd be chayav. So again, those inferences totally contradict each other because it sounded like as long as you were there for one of them, it doesn't matter which one, you'll be exempt. And the second part sounds like if you were there for one or the other, right, you're going to be chayav. So lomar lecha, how do we resolve this? Again, we're going to resolve it by one way you'll be obligated, one way you'll be exempt. Okay, we start with the one you're going to be exempt. Hayayimo b'shat sheila. As long as you were there b'shat sheila, the time you borrowed it, ain't tzarich liot imo b'shat shvura u'meita. You don't need to be there. Again, remember, be there doesn't mean be there physically. Be there, I'm just going back to the general, which means the person was working for you, right? The one who you borrowed it from was working for you already. Then they don't need to be working for you b'shat shvura u'meita in order for you to be exempt. But if they're working for you in shvura meita, that won't help you be exempt because they have to have been with you b'shat sheila. And that's how we're going to explain each inference. One is coming to include one case, one is coming to exclude the other case. Now, the Gemara says, okay, that's very fine and good, but it's arbitrary. Ipohana. Why don't you say both came to the same conclusion, which we know is the halakha, because we started the Mishnah with this. The Mishnah told us sheila bebalim only works if when I borrowed the object, you were already working for me. But if you started working for me later, that's not going to exempt me. But the Gemara says, if you're basing it on this drasha, where one pasuk goes one way, one goes the other way, and we're just going to say, this is this case, this is that case, for all intents and purposes, you could have flipped it. And you could have said, as long as you were there b'shat shvura u'meita, you're going to be exempt, right? When it broke. But it doesn't matter if you were there or not at the time you borrowed it. That doesn't help you at all. So why don't we say the reverse? To which they say, well, mistabra sheila adifa mishum dekamai teila l'reshuti. We're going to say sheila is more important that you be there because that's the time when it came into my domain. I'm the borrower, came into my domain at that moment, and that's why that's going to be the determining factor for am I obligated for own sim or am I not? Okay, were you working for me at the time or not? To which the Gemara says, come on, adrabah, could be the reverse. If we're talking about obligation, when I become obligated in paying for damages, if something breaks or, beyond my circumstances beyond my control, well, shouldn't we say the determining moment is when the onus happens? Because that's when I actually become obligated. So what do you think? If the owner's there, it would be if the owner's there when when the tragedy happened, when the animal dropped dead. But they say no, because here comes the chicken and the egg argument. Well, there wouldn't be any significance to the animal dying if, in terms of me anyway, if I hadn't borrowed it, right? It's your animal. What does that have to do with me? Unless I borrowed it. So the borrowing is what is critical. To which they say, what do you mean? What comes first, the chicken or the egg? Okay, if it hadn't broken, well, we wouldn't be talking about liablity. I just borrowed your object, I brought it back to you, there would be nothing to discuss. So we're going in full circle here. We're getting nowhere. Well, now they're going to finally determine it. Why is she'ela? Because again, we know the answer. We're just trying to figure out how we got there. She'ela is the critical moment. It's all determined based on what the status was, what was happening at the moment of the borrowing. Why? If I borrow your animal, then when I borrow it, at the moment I borrow it, I now obligate myself to feed your animal while it's here, right? I have to feed your animal. So from that moment, I've taken upon myself obligation of responsibility for this animal for feeding it. And that includes responsibility if circumstances beyond my control happened. So that's the determining moment because of the chiyuv mazono. It's the same idea. Okay, one could argue with that. And perhaps that's why Rav Ashi brings a different explanation. So now those were two explanations, which are really one and the same, which are the inferences from the psukim. It was just kind of coming at it from different angles, but the inferences from the psukim contradict each other. What the inferences said were different. But either which way they contradict each other, to resolve them, we're going to have to say, we're going to distinguish between shat she'ela and shat meita, shvura meita. Rav Ashi amar krat, v'chi yish'al ish me'im re'ehu, v'lo re'ehu imo, shalem yishalem, ha're'ehu imo patur. Rav Ashi says, brings a third explanation. There's a pasuk that says, v'chi yish'al ish me'im re'ehu. Person borrows something from a friend. Below re'ehu imo, but if the friend is not there, then shalem yishalem. In other words, if he's not a friend, but he's working for you, then, right? So ha re'ehu imo patur. So now he says, we're going to learn it all from the very first words in the pasuk. Ki yish'al ish me'im re'ehu, which means when you borrow it from your friend, notice the re'ehu, your friend, right? Me'im re'ehu v'lo re'ehu imo. From your friend, but not that your friend is with you. That's when shalem yishalem, which comes to infer ha re'ehu imo. If your friend was with you, meaning they were already working for you, you'd be exempt. So basically what they're saying is, now why does this prove it's shat she'ela? And this is a much better proof. Because it's in the words ki yishal ish me'im re'ehu. The whole inference to ba'alav imo comes from the re'ehu words which appear about the she'ela. And therefore it's clear it's the moment of she'ela. That's a much better proof. But the obvious problem is, if you learn the whole exemption of ba'alav imo from the words me'im re'ehu, then why do you need the pasuk to say, forget about the fact that it said, if the owner's there, you have to pay, and if the owner's not there, you don't have to pay, and that was repeated. You don't even need either of those two psukim, because it already says it in ki yish'al me'im re'ehu. Only from your friend when he's, right, when he's not with you. Okay, not, right, me'im re'ehu and not re'ehu imo. So, if that's the case, right? So what do you need? Ba'alav ein imo and im ba'alav imo, it's totally useless. We already learned it. To which they say, well, if we didn't have that, you would think that you wouldn't know to darshan re'ehu. In other words, the re'ehu drasha comes after we have the whole tour of shmira of babalim. Then you can darshan the re'ehu pasuk to say, oh, you see, the shmira babalim is already referenced, alluded to in here, which teaches you it's all about the moment of she'ela, because that's where it appears in the pasuk. It's talking about the borrowing, the moment, the act of borrowing. But without the words im balavimo or im balavimo, you never would have come up with shmira ba'alim on your own, and you wouldn't have thought the word re'eu is coming to tell you that. We only know that in retrospect, because once, in hindsight, once we have those words, then we know to darshan it, and then we can darshan it to prove our point. So 3 different explanations for how we know it's shat she'ela and not shat, or how we know that there's at least a distinction here, that it has to be one and not the other. And then we had to say, well, obviously that was going to be she'ela, which it wasn't so obvious, took some time to get there. Or Rav Ashi has a much better proof for why it's specifically shat she'ela and not shat shvora u'meita. But again, they're all on the working assumption, they all know the answer. It's just a matter of getting to how we derive the answer. Okay, next section. Now we're going to have 8 questions. Okay, I'm going to divide them in 2 different ways. One is Rami bar Hama asked 7 of them. Ravina asked the last. But the first, out of the 8, the first 4 have to do with the chiyuv of ones. The last 4 have to do with the exemption of shmira b'ba'alim. And each of the 8 is talking about a unique circumstance that comes up. Would the regular laws apply in this unique circumstance? Okay, that's the gist of all these 8 questions. 4 have to do with onus and the chiyuv of onus, the fact that a shoel is chayav also in unexpected damages, and the second 4 are the fact that the shoel or socher, anyone, right, is exempt if the ba'alim are already working for them. By Rami bar Hama. So the first 4 questions are like this: Sha'ala li Rav ma. You borrowed an animal to engage in bestiality with the animal. Sexual relations with the animal, that's why you took it. Mahu. Now, why would there be a difference? Like, would you be chayiv and onsim in this case? Do we say, when we say shoel in the Torah, we're talking about borrowing for normal things. This is not a normal thing. Nobody borrows an animal to engage in bestiality with the animal. It's very rare you would do that. And therefore, maybe that's not the shoel that the Torah was talking about. They were talking about borrowing for normal use. This is not normal use. Maybe you won't be chayiv and onus. Or the whole idea of borrowing is to benefit, to enjoy. Well, this person is getting enjoyment, benefit from it. So maybe that would count. Okay, question. We don't have an answer to 6 out of these 8 questions, the first 6. Let's say you borrow something just to look like you have expensive stuff. Okay, but you're never really planning to use it. You just borrow it for the you want someone to see that in your garden you have this gorgeous cow or something. Mamona be'ina v'ha'ika. Do we say, look, borrowing means you borrowed something with financial value. This has financial value, and yeah, you're gonna the of onus is gonna kick in. O dilma mamona de'ilay hana'amine be'ina v'leika. Or do you actually have to benefit from it? And this is a benefiting. Now it is benefiting, but it's not a tangible benefit. It's not like the animal, plowed my field. That's very different. This is an intangible benefit. It's just that I look better. It's not something measurable. Perhaps that's not, right? It's not, there was no benefit, and therefore maybe you're not obligated. What if I borrowed it to do, not to plow my field, which is obviously worth a lot, but I did it to do something very small that's not even worth a pruta. Now, we've talked before that some things have to have a minimum amount, like kiddushin, which has to be a pruta. So do we say mamona be'ina ve'ika? Do we say, look, it needs to just be something with value, and this has value? It doesn't matter that it's not a lot of value. Or do we say anything less than a pruta is just not important? Now, let's say you say you need a pruta. This is based on, if you would answer the previous question at, it needs to be a pruta. What if I borrow 2 animals to together do a job that's worth a pruta, and then one of them dies? Mi amrina, do we say, zil batar sho'elu mash'il v'ika? I'm going to be chayiv and onsim when I have a deal where I borrowed something that was worth a pruta. So I borrowed 2 cows that were worth a pruta. One died, I have to pay. O dilma zil batar parot. Or if one died, well, we look at my relationship with the animal. In other words, I took responsibility for this animal, but this animal was only doing half a prutas of work. So then I wouldn't be obligated, right? And each one by itself isn't considered mamon because each one only did half a pruta. Okay. Those are the 4 about onsim. We have no answers to these questions. Now we have the 4, again, 3 by Rami bar Hama. The 4th will be by Ravina about the P'tur of Sheila B'Ba'alim. Sha'al, again, we're going to have weird cases. Sha'al mishutafim v'nish'alu echad mehem. I borrowed a cow from 2 owners. They jointly owned the para, and nish'alo echad mehem, but only one of them worked for me, not both of them. So with one owner, it's sheila v'ba'alim, with the other one, it isn't. Kulo ba'alav bi'inav halakha. When we say ba'alav imo, do we mean all the owners? So if there's two owners and only one worked for me, I'm not exempt. V'halakha, right? And we don't have ba'alav or dilameh who palga didemi amiftar. But maybe, right? I now owe half a parah to each person because, right, the parah died. I theoretically have to pay. Well, one of them was working for me, so I don't pay. The other one wasn't working for me, so I do have to pay them. Okay? Or do we say that this just is no exemption? That's the first option. Shutafim, now we're going to have the reverse. The partners are the ones who borrowed. So two partners borrow a cow. Shutafim shashalu v'nish'al le'echad mehem. And the owner of the cow works for one of the two partners. The same thing with the reverse case. Mahu, do you say kula shoal b'inav halakha? Has to be the borrower entirely has to have the other person working to get the exemption. And here only one of the two gets the exemption, so that won't work. Or do we say no? Since two of the partners borrowed and one of them guy was working, so that one doesn't have to pay, the other one would have to pay. Sha'al mea isha. Okay, now we're going to get to the two that we are going to have answers for. You borrow from a woman, her nichse melog. Okay, now we have to go back and remember all about nichse melog. Part of our daf will be all about this, which is she inherits property from her father, let's say, and she's married. The husband has rights to the payroll, the proceeds, while they're married. But the goof, okay, let's say it's land. The land itself belongs to her. The crops belong to the husband. So, what if you borrowed from the woman her usufruct property, okay, this nichse melog, v'nish'al ba'ala, and the husband worked for the person. Okay, so the person who borrows from the woman, not the woman, but the husband works for him. Now, here it's tricky because it's she'ela b'ba'alim, but the husband isn't really the ba'alim of the usufruct property. The husband has rights to the proceeds, but not to the object itself. So, or isha shesha'alav and isha'ala ba'al. Now we're going to have the reverse. The woman borrows an object, and the guy works for the husband. So again, it's husband and wife. Now, we don't say here ishto kegufo. That's not what we say, like husband and wife are considered one and the same. That's not the case. The question is, what the husband has rights to the proceeds, but doesn't have right to the actual object. So if the husband's the one who's working or working for, right, does this exemption kick in? So do we say it's really all based on this question? Kinyan payroll kinyan guftami. Although we've seen this many times, the kinyan of payroll, when you have the rights to proceeds, is it like you own the property at that moment or no? Now, clearly she owns the property, but is your kinyan, your ownership over this object, is it like it's your own? Okay, so if it's like your own, then when they borrow it from the woman, it's like borrowing it from the man. And then if the man is either working or being worked for, depending on the situation that we talked about, then it would be sheila b'bali. But if not, then it's not. It's her object and the husband's working. Those are two different people. That has nothing to do with anything. Amrele Ravina le Rav Ashi. Last question. Haomer lishlucho sevi hishael im parati mahu. You go to a messenger, an agent, and you say, listen, go and work for someone for me, like go on my behalf and work for this person and bring my cow with you. So now that's going to be a case of she'ela b'ba'alim, except not really, because the agent is the one who's doing the work, right? And it's your parah. So if you're one and the same, then we're going to say it's she'ela b'ba'alim because your agent is working as you. So it's as if you're working and you're giving the object. So the other person's going to be exempt from the, okay, right? She'eli in parati, right. Now, ba'alav mamash bi'inav halakha, o doma shlucho shel adam k'mo tovika. When we say ba'alav imo, does it have to be actually the Baal, or can you send a messenger? What we say, messenger is like you. So now Rav Acha bered Rav Ashi, Abaye comes to Rav Ashi and says, I have answers to two of the questions. Baal, the husband with the wife, is plugged to Rabbi Yochanan Rish Lakish. Famous machlok Rabbi Yochanan Rish Lakish. Is kinyan peiroke kinyan aguf or not? We've seen this before. Shaliach plugged to Rabbi Yonatan Rabbi Yoshi. Okay, that's the topic sentence. Again, we're going to go to this. That's how we started today with this kind of topic sentence, and we're going back to Rabbi Yonatan Rabbi Yoshi, but a different machlok that they have, not the same one. So let's hear. Baal plukta to Rabbi Yochanan b'Rish Lakish to eat as it was said, hamocher sadeu lechavero leperot. If you sell, this is not a husband and wife, this is anybody. If I own land, but I sell you just the proceeds, right? I tell you I have this palm tree, you can have all the fruits of the palm tree for the next 3 years. Okay, but I didn't sell you the tree itself or the land it was on. So I sold my field for proceeds. Rabbi Yochanan Amar, now here a totally different topic coming up on Shavuot. You bring bikurim. Now the person who's taking the fruits is the one who has to bring the first fruits. The problem is that when you bring the first fruits, you make a declaration and you say, on this land that God gave me. Now, you don't own the land, so can you say that or not? Well, it depends how you view the kinyan on payroll. If you say having proceeds is like you have the land, then you can say the mikra bikurim, because you could say on this land that God gave me, because it's as if it's your land right now. So Rabbi Yochanan Omer mevi v'koreh, you bring bikurim and you say the declaration. Rish Lakish Omer mevi ve'eno koreh, you bring it, but you can't read the declaration because you don't own the land. That's a lie. So obviously the debate is Rabbi Yochanan Omer mevi v'koreh, you can read it, bring it and read it because kinyan payroll kinyan aguftam, because owning the land, the proceeds is like owning the land. And Rish Lakish Amar mevi ve'eno koreh, because kinyan payroll is lav kinyan aguf. We don't view this as a kinyan aguf. Shaliach, plukta Rabbi Yonatan for Rabbi Yoshia, Ditanya. Again, we're going to bring a totally different case, but learn from it to ours. Ditanya, Homer lapitropus. Kol nedarim shtei ishtino deret. This is something we learned also. You say to an apitropus, okay, which in this case is just really like a messenger, said all the vows that my wife makes, mikan ad shavo mimakom ploni, okay, from the time until I get back from my trip, haferla. I want you to nullify any vows she makes. Veheferla, and he does it. You might think this works. No, Talmud Lomar, Isha yikimena ve'isha yifarena. Okay, some people say it's because it's Isha meaning not a woman, it's Ish Shelah. The man, the husband, gets to ratify them, and the husband also can invalidate them and nullify them. And notice it could just say the husband is the one who ratifies and nullifies. Why does it add Isha a second time? To say only the husband, not any messenger. Okay, so this means that even though we normally say your agent is like you, not in this case. And likewise, not in our case. Why? Because where do we have a repeat in our case? Where we started today. Im ba'alavimo, v'im im ba'alavimo, right? We have 2 times it says the Baal, which means only the owner, not an agent. That's Rabbi Yoshia. Rabbi Yonatan Omer. Matzina b'chol makor sheshlucho shel adam k'moto. Anytime. Okay? In the nullifying the vows, it would work. And in our case, it would work. Okay, so if I basically rent out I say, go work on my behalf for so-and-so and bring my item with you, that's sheila b'balim, according to Rabbi Yonatan. Now, we're going to take that case and change one minor thing and get something very interesting. I'm Rav Elish the Rava. Homer la'avdo. What if I say about my slave? I say to my slave the same thing. Say v'yisha'el in parati mam. I say, go work for so-and-so and bring my cow with you and lend it to so-and-so. Is that sheila b'balim or not? And now we're going to say, we can ask this question both according to Rabbi Yonatan and according to Rabbi Yoshia. We still have a question because one can distinguish between an eved and an agent in 2 different ways. Okay, an eved, we're talking about an eved Knani, who basically becomes a pseudo-Jew, right? And they become chayav in mitzvot like women, where they're obligated in all the positive mitzvot, but not the negative ones. But today we're going to learn that there's a bit of a distinction between the eved and the woman, which is very interesting. So either which way we looked at the last question, we can ask the question. So I'll explain it as we go. If you say an agent is like the person, and then theoretically in this case it should be sheila b'balim because the eved's working on behalf of the master, but you could still ask the question because you could say maybe shlucho shel adam kamoto is hanamila shaliach debar mitzvah. Shaliach is part of the mitzvah. He's part of, in other words, since you can be an agent yourself, you can be a shomer yourself, so you're operating instead of me as being a shomer, or you can be a worker, right? You're just like me. Aval eved de lav bar mitzvah lo, but an eved who's not part of mitzvah, no. So now it's very weird. An eved is part of mitzvah. So Soloveitchik says, and this is part of the proof of his theory, an eved is not like a woman, even though technically speaking, they both have exemptions from time-bound mitzvah and are obligated positive mitzvah. This shows that an eved is not in the realm of certain things. Like a woman, she would watch or work, she would have all the same laws as a man. But because she's part of the world of mitzvot, she just has an exemption. Whereas an eved is not part of all mitzvot. In other words, it's not like the Eved is part of all mitzvot and has an exemption for time-bound ones. It's that an Eved is partially on their way to being a Jew, right? They've got a brit milah and they're obligated in certain mitzvot, but they're not part of all mitzvot. Like, for example, kiddushin and kitin, they're not part of. Right? There is no such thing as kiddushin for an Eved. So they're different. So their exemption is actually, even though technically it's very similar, it's very different. That's really just an interesting idea about that Soloveitchik talks about. Okay, moving on. So do we say that an Eved lav bar mitzvah and odilma afilu l'man damar? Alternatively, you could say the opposite, even according to the other opinion. Even if you say ein shlucho shel adam kamoto in general, shliach is not, in this case particularly, shliach is not like you because, right, this is because it says the ba'alim have to be there and not your agent. But hanimile shaliach, that would be some random person you asked to do something for you. But Eved, yad Eved ki avrabo down here. Remember we like this? The Eved is like an extension of you. Your money's theirs, right? Whatever they make goes to you. And therefore, theoretically, they really are like you. To which they answer, in fact, and yes, the Eved would be different, and Dafka would be more likely to have you would have the exemption here. Okay. By Rami bar Hama. Okay, we have a lot of questions Rami bar Hama asked today. We're going to have even more. Now Rami bar Hama is going to ask the question. It's going to take us 3 versions till we understand what this question really is. So now we're back to the nichse velug. Woman has usufruct property, and then she comes into marriage, and the husband now has rights to them, right? He can use them. What's his level of responsibility? Is he like, and moving now to amabed, shoel have or socher have? Is he like someone who's borrowing something, which means if while he's using her usufruct property, he destroys it, by accident, like some unexpected circumstances happens, is he like a shoel and he'll be chayav? Oh, socher have. Or no, is he like someone who rented something, which, unexpected damages happen? Well, tough luck on her. So I'm a Rava. Lefum korpa shabeshta. I don't know if he's trying to be respectful. He says, because you're so brilliant, you made a huge mistake. Okay. And it's in your brilliance, you said something ridiculous. So, manafsha, it shouldn't make a difference. Okay, you might not like this next line, although I will bring you a counter to it. So be prepared. Either which way, you're trying to say, is the man responsible or not if something happens? Of course, the man's not responsible. This is a classic case, whether he's a shoel or whether he's a socher. There's an exemption both for a shoel and for a socher if it's shmira b'ba'alim. Now, what does it mean shmira b'ba'alim? If she's working for him while he's using her property, then he's exempt. Now, she's working for him, as Rashi says. Okay, you might not like this Rashi, but sheila b'ba'alim, he's second line in Rashi. Shehi imo tadir b'melachto, because she's always working for him. V'hi neshelet lo tchila mishenisa. Basically, at the moment of marriage, she's working for him forever, right? It's sounds like she's her slave almost, right? But not really, okay? And not only that, but I will read you one line in the Rava. I think it's a bit out of context, but this fascinating halakha in the Rambam in Hilchot Ishut, chapter 21, halakha 9. Okay, you can look it up. Rambam talks about what if a woman breaks dishes when she's married, okay? She breaks the dishes while she's doing her jobs in the house. She's exempt. And this is not minadin. She really should be liable, but it's a takana, the Rambam says. Because if you don't say this, you're never going to have shalom bayit. If every time she breaks a dish, she has to pay, right? Crazy. Not a good relationship. The Rava comments there and says, the Rava, the Hasagot Rava, he often contradicts the Rambam, says you're wrong. Says, lo min Hashem uzeh. That's not why. It's not because it's takana for shalom bayit. It's because mipnei shmira b'ba'alim. She's exempt because of shmira b'ba'alim. Why? Shehu sachor la b'chosha. Because he works for her all the time. So according to the Rava, it goes both ways. Okay, so don't think it's just that she's subjugated to him. It's that they're each subjugated to each other, which makes a lot of sense. The Rambam might disagree with that, which may make sense in the context of the Rambam and Muslim Spain that he was living in. Anyway, that's just a side issue that I couldn't ignore. Okay, so now we have this. Let's just go back to our question. He says, is he a shoel or is he a socher? To which Rava says, there's no question. It doesn't make a difference what he is because it's shmir b'ba'alim and he'd be exempt. Ela ki kamabayle l'Rami bar Hama. So Rava reinterprets the question of Rami bar Hama. It must be he's asking the following. It's going to be attempt number 2, which we're going to reject also, and then we'll finally have 3. What he's really asking. De'agar mina para v'hadran nasma. T1 at the first moment we meet them, they're not married. He rents an animal from her. Then they get married. And since the animal's hers, it's usufruct property. Now he has rights to it. So the question is now, is he a shoel or is he a socher? Now, why is this relevant? Well, so shoel have or socher have once they get married. Now, if we say shoel have, then adir sheila bebali maka schirut shelo bebali. So now, if it's sheila, then it'll be sheila bebalin because we shifted from renting to borrowing. So once he shifts to become a borrower, and now it's borrowing bebalim, so he's going to be exempt. So that would be the relevance if he's a shoel. If he's a socher, he's still going to be obligated. Why is that? Odilma socher have, or maybe he's renting uschira kidakaima kaima. Now, if he's viewed with her usufruct property in general as renting, well, then he started renting. He continued renting. Well, it doesn't morph into something else. Since it doesn't morph into something else, the exemption of she'ela bebalim doesn't kick into place. In a second, they're going to say that's ridiculous. It should anyway. But what they're basically saying is since it's transitioning, if we transition from schira to she'ela, from renting to borrowing, there's already a transition. And then once it's she'ela, well, it's she'ela bebalim because now she works for him. But if we go from renting when they're married, when they're not married, to renting when they're married, there's no real change. So it just stays as if it's shmira shalom, it's schira without her working for him because it didn't start that way, and then he wouldn't be exempt. But they say, no, that doesn't work. It's still morphing into something else because it was schirut without baalim, where the baalim weren't working for you, and now it's schirut with the baalim. That's still a change. So it should shift over anyway. So that's not a good question. Third option, Ella, ki Abaye Rami Hama. The question must be this. Kigonda agra ihi parame alma v'hadran. She rented the cow before she was married. Then she got married and she still had this rental arrangement going for some more time. So what is his connection to this rental animal? Now, again, theoretically, anything that's hers that she brings into the marriage, he gets to use. The question is, what's his level of responsibility? When he uses her usufruct property, is he a borrower or is he a renter? Now, this goes back to a sugya we learned at Daf Lam and Hay, which you might not remember, but what happens if I rent something and then I lend it to someone else? Or I rent something and I rent it to someone else? Okay, so to who are they responsible, right? So now, the question was really if I rent something and then I loan it, I lend it to someone. Now, I wasn't chayav in onus when I rented it because I rented it. I don't have to pay for unexpected damages. But when I loan it to someone, they have to pay for unexpected damages. And then the machloket was, who did they pay it to? Did they pay the onus to me, who loaned it to them? But it wasn't mine. I was renting it from someone. Or did they pay it to the original owner? So now this is why it's going to be relevant if he's a borrower or a renter. Because if he's a borrower, then there's this added onus. And the question is, but that I wasn't obligated in, he now is. And then who does he pay it to, me or the person? So let's see. So now, if I got married after I already rented this animal, aliba de Rabbanan, and it goes according to the rabbis who say, so no, not that it goes according to rabbis. According to the rabbis who say, Shoel mishalem l'socher lo tibayla, divadai sheila bebalim. If he's a borrower and he owes the money to me, well, obviously he doesn't owe me the money because that we already said is sheila bebalim. That there's no question. It's not relevant, the question. Ki tibayla, because if he's a socher, he doesn't pay for onus, and if he's a shoel, he doesn't pay for onus because of shmira bebalim. Ki tibayla haliba de Rabbi Yossi. But the question is asked, specifically Rava and Rav Ashi asked this question according to Rabbi Yossi, who says, Damar tachzor para lebalim arishonim. The onus, even though I rented it from you, let's say I rented it from you, and then my husband was using it once we got married. If I rented it from you, I'm not obligated in onus. So when my husband borrows it from me, Rabbi Yossi says, my husband has to pay you the onus. If my husband has to pay you the onus, well, now the big question is, when the husband uses my usufruct property, is he a borrower or a renter? If he's a renter, he won't have to pay for unexpected damages. If he's a borrower, he will, and he'll have to pay you, the original owner. So that's the question. My shoel have or socher have, and then I already explained what the ramifications are. Okay, get ready for the answer. The big question that took us forever to figure out, is he a shoel, is he a socher, comes Rava and says, besides that he didn't like Rami bar Hama's questions, in the end, he says, I'm a Rava, ba lo shoel, velo socher. He's neither. Why? He's like a buyer. How do we know this? Well, this comes to something else we learned before in Dinei Ishut. Mida Rabbi Yossi Rabbi Chanina. The Rabbi Yossi Rabbi Chanina. Be'usha hitkinu. When Usha, they made the following takana. This is after if you remember, the Sanhedrin moves after Korban 2 different places. Also even before. Be'usha hitkinu ha'isha shemachra b'nechsei melog v'chaye ba'ala v'meita habal motzi miyada l'kucha. Okay, this is a big line. We need to understand a bunch of things before we explain this. A woman generally, what happens with her nechsei melog, if the husband dies or divorces her, she gets them back. Okay, they're her heirlooms, remember? She gets them back. If she dies, he inherits them. But what if she sold them in her lifetime? She could. She owns the guf. She could sell it. No, if she sells it, remember, she doesn't have the proceeds. The husband has the proceeds while she's alive. So what she does is she's selling it. She needs money in her life. Husband's not giving her. She decides, I'll sell my usufruct property. She sells it, which basically means these people have the rights to it. The husband divorces her if he dies first, and in the event that she dies, they'll get the land. Okay, she can sell it. Okay, but in the meantime, although she's still alive and he's still alive, all the proceeds are going to the husband. So they just have it's like futures. Okay, options. But in Usha, they said this is going to create a bad dynamic between the husband and wife. It's going to cause a husband to get angry because he's supposed to inherit it. So they basically said that when she dies, if she dies first, he can remove it from those who, okay, so if he dies first, they'll get it. But if not, he can take it back. This shows the fact that Usha Yitkinu, that he can take it away. In Usha, really, Yitkinu, that he's like a buyer on this land. And therefore, he has buying rights. Now, buyer doesn't have levels of responsibility to anyone. So the owner, the husband in her nefsei melog, is like a buyer and doesn't have any responsibility. So forget this question you had about onus, this, that, not relevant. Okay, by Rami bar Hama, another question. Rami bar Hama doesn't stop asking questions today. When she has usufruct property and then let's say it comes to her in inheritance, now he has rights to use it. So who is obligated? And let's say it was hekdesh and nobody knew. Misuse of consecrated property is always accidental. And then now usually hekdesh happens when you use something. But what they're saying is like this. The usufruct property comes to her. Now, what does it mean to use it? Like I bring it to a store and I buy something with my money. So that's using it. Even if I'm not really using it, I'm just kind of transferring it to someone else. So when it comes to her and then gets transferred to him, is he obligated in meila? Because it's like a transfer of property. So who's the meila on? So again, we don't really understand this question. And Rava comes and says he didn't like Rami Abraham's questions. Man limo, who do you think would be moel? None of them really. Limo baal. You want to say when the husband kind of, has access to it, that immediately makes him chayav and meila. He wants to have benefits from her stuff. If it's going to cause him to now have to bring a sacrifice and pay money because he misused consecrated property, certainly says, I don't want that. So he doesn't really ever accept it because he didn't want bad stuff, things that were going to cause problems. Timol ihi, maybe she does then, because she gets it from, inheritance. And she's kind of giving it, right? So now, and I guess the issue is, it's that she's kind of giving it to the husband. It's like paying for it in a store, like buying something with it. She's transferring it to him. Well, think about it. This is a good line, okay? Because if you didn't think this, well, it's clear from here. She doesn't even want to give him the stuff she's supposed to give him. She wants her property for herself. The rabbi said she has to. The court institute, she has to. She wouldn't want to. For sure, she wouldn't want to give it over to him if it's going to now cause her to have to pay all this stuff of the damages for the meila. So, no. Nimalu beitin, maybe it's the beitin's fault. And Rashi points out something interesting, because the beitin made this takana years ago, but any beitin that implements it, and basically every beitin of that generation is basically continuing the takanot of the previous. Maybe it's their fault because they're causing this to be passed on to the husband from their takana. So maybe they should be responsible, but of course that's ridiculous. Ki avdu Rabbana takanta ba'amr ba'al lokech havi, when they made this takana, lehetera, li'sur lo avi Rabbana takanta, they don't make takanot to create problems for them. So there's nobody who could even be chayav in meila. So Elam, Rava explains, Baal ma'al l'chashiyotzi, midi dehavi amotzi mod hekdesh l'chulin. It's only when the husband actually uses the property. If he goes and buys something with it, or that's when meila will kick in. but not just from her getting it and him gaining rights to it. That for sure, not for the reasons we said before. Abaye, the last question for today. If I borrow something and I use it, now I borrowed it obviously to use, and it depreciates, do I have to pay you for depreciation? My. Amar, so this was a question asked in the Beit Midrash. Amar Omer Rabbanit Rav Ashi. This was the person who answered. If you're going to have to pay for depreciation, then you're going to have to pay for, if you, let's say you borrow a car and you use it and the car dies right when you're driving it. Now, we learned already, you don't have to pay for that. That's not onus. Onus is like someone smashed you, someone smashed into you totally unexpectedly and the car's now dead and they run away and there's no one to pay for it, right? That's unexpected damages. But dying because it just died, dropped dead right when you're in the middle of driving it, that's not your fault. Some people say it's because obviously it was the owner's fault that they didn't take care of their car properly and now it died, or their animal properly and it died. Perhaps that's a reason. There's a bunch of reasons why, but let's leave it at that right now. So if you want to say you're going to be chayav, nema, and how do we know I'm not going to be chayav for that? Because if it dies from normal use, I have a claim against that. I can say, nema lav leugma b'chilta shilte. I didn't borrow this item to just stick it on my windowsill. I obviously borrowed it to use. So obviously it was going to depreciate. And obviously if it died, it's not my fault. It's just from regular use. So as long as I used it normal in a normal usage, it's not my fault. I'm not responsible. So it would be not for dying and certainly not for depreciation. So in other words, this rabbi says this, and amarava, so in other words, he's saying, do you want to say you're chayav? How could that be? He's kind of saying it doesn't make any sense. And then Rabbi says exactly what I just said, which is, lo mabaya kachash basar machmat malacha de patur. Obviously, depreciation, you're going to be exempt. Ela afilu meta machmat malacha nami patur. In other words, even that, you're going to be exempt. Okay, you're going to be exempt for both the amarle lav leugma b'chilta shilte, because you have a claim to say, I didn't borrow it to just stick it in my windowsill. I borrowed it to use. And therefore, if it died from normal use, I'm not obligated. And we'll start with some stories of that tomorrow. So what we did today was we started with how do we get 3 different answers for how do we get that shat she'ela is the moment that determines that the ba'alav imo, the exemption. We had 8 questions around 8 questions in general, most Rami for Hama, about 4 about onsim, 4 about she'ela b'bali, and in strange cases, does the regular rules apply? We had answers to 2 of them that really they're halakha tanaim. We had questions about, the shaliach and the woman. Those were the 2 main ones that we ended up discussing. We got into these for property of a woman, husband like a shoel or a socher, and what was even the question about? And then we got to this other question of the baal b'nichsei ishto, who's moel, and then we said only when the husband uses it. And then we ended with this depreciation and dying from halakha, where it's the one case where the shoel is actually not obligated. With that, we finish for today. Wishing everyone a good day.